Everyone, it has been an amazing, yet another amazing customer support, client success, executive brain trust here today. Today, we talked about strategy mapping, strategic planning for CS organizations, highly engaging, highly relevant. Brian Flagg from Northern Tool presented, and I'm actually going to turn the time over to him to open up this panel discussion. Brian, if you could take a moment and just summarize your presentation. And then after that, we've got this great group of CS executives that are going to kind of add some clarity and some color to the breakout rooms and what happened in those breakout rooms. So with that, Brian, could you summarize what you covered?
All right. Thanks, Paul. Certainly will. And thanks for sticking around, panel. Yeah, I talked about strategy in general, how it evolved throughout the years, and kind of landed on what I thought was a simplistic, not simplistic, but an easier to understand, easier to communicate view of how to develop strategy using strategy maps. I like it. It's 4 quadrants. It's fairly simple. Again, you can then use that to drive high-level strategies, actions, high-level actions, KPIs in each of those strategy areas based on what's important to your business, and balance those KPIs. So you've got measurements for financial, you've got measurements for customer. For those internal groups, that's quite often I've seen where we kind of fall down. We don't really have much in those, and we really do need to be mindful of the internal customer, of how much we're spending, how much we're costing the business, if you will, and then to focus on learning and growth, the people aspect. I never see, or very rarely see, enough direction and focus on that as I do the big operations or process area. We're operations people. That's where we're comfortable. So again, I think strategy maps is not only a great tool to develop your strategies, but to communicate. They're fairly simple, 4 quadrants. I always take the opportunity to communicate from upwards so that people above me that don't really understand my business, but can understand the strategy map and the strategies that I'm outlining. And then all the way down through my supervisors to the people on the phones, the people actually handling the tickets. So I use that as kind of a launch point, Paul. And this is a discussion, a subject that is, a lot of interest that I've got, and I'm just so interested in to see how others are doing and how they're progressing in that area.
Excellent. And, we had about 67 CS execs on the call today. And after your presentation, we broke up into breakout rooms. Just to discuss, we were all over the map as far as, implementing strategy plans, not implementing them. How far along down the road are you? So we got into a discussion about some of the benefits, aligning the team around shared purpose, cross-functional dependencies, working with other teams to have a shared impact, cascading software, all sorts of things. So I'm actually going to pass it over to Chris, one of our members, to talk a little bit about how he uses them and the benefits he's seen. So Chris, over to you.
All right, thanks, Paul. Yeah, we had a really great breakout. I think of the 4 of us in our group, we were at, I think we had somebody at every point in that sort of strategic planning life cycle, from we've never even started it to a pretty good degree of maturity. And I think I've done, over the course of about 2 decades, honestly, strategic planning. I know I'm not just saying this because it's what we're talking about right now. It's probably my single most favorite thing to do, either in the leadership of my own teams or divisions, or I do it in just a voluntary capacity for small nonprofits. I would suggest to anybody, the most important thing is, no matter where you are in the process, and especially if you know you need to do it, but haven't been afraid to take that plunge, find a framework or a methodology and just go for it. There are probably hundreds of very, very good, viable strategic planning frameworks that one can use for all sorts of different organizations. One that I like, that I was introduced to from, I think, at least we found it through University of Kansas, was called the VMOSA, or VMOSA strategic planning methodology. It allows any size organization, and I have no affiliation with University of Kansas. I love them, but I don't have any affiliation. An organization or a team at any phase, any size, to really take a cross-functional approach to what do we need to be focusing on, what's our North Star, and how do we align the most critical things we're doing to that, and ensuring throughout the course of the year or the quarter or whatever that what we're doing stays within the context of that ultimate vision and that mission, and we're not getting pulled off track to do things that seem important but don't necessarily contribute to the overarching objectives that we need to accomplish.
Excellent, Chris. Thank you so much for that. I mean, it really does keep you focused, and it's so easy to get distracted. And that's when value becomes questioned, right? So staying on top of that is key. Anne, I see you off mute there. Do you have some thoughts on this?
Oh, I actually had a question for Chris. You know, how much time, if you had to break up how many hours per week, or just in general, because it's probably not something you chunk out, how do you make the time for that in the face of everything else?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like many things, you're going to get out of it what you put into it.
Mm-hmm.
The earlier phases, depending on where you are in that sort of on that maturity, continuum, it can be fairly labor intensive on the front end. But that doesn't mean it has to all be done at once. If you're already operating, then this is just adding something good and important to what you're already doing. I typically like to have monthly, once we're up to a certain level of maturity and just sort of a good cadence, I like monthly check-ins where, teams and managers and directors are obviously required to be, I hope that those folks are staying more engaged with those plans, but depending on the size of the organization and the complexity of your mission, anything from every 3 weeks to a month can be a good place to start once you've finished your planning. And then it's really a question of what I think benefits the organization most and what works for your teams.
Okay, that's helpful. I would say the lesson I've learned, because we're fairly mature where I am now, but I've been in the start, like many of us, been all around the bend. And I think that we did great with the bigger picture. Where it tends to get bogged down is when you translating the strategy into tactics, and how far down you go, and whether it's 5 things or 15 things. That's
in my
that's
experience,
my lesson is the next piece.
Yeah, the good methodologies out there will lead you very tactically from the North Star down to your action plans and those, your SMART objectives, strategies, and action plans, without too much, learning, building it while you fly it.
And if one doesn't work for you, you can switch to another one.
And I was going to say, and Linz, I'm going to have you go after this. One of the things I noticed in our meeting today was a lot of people using OKRs, but not seeing. So on the flip side of that, Anne, not seeing the minutia translated, the employees not being able to see how it goes back up to the strategic plan. So you've got both sides of that you kind of have to balance. So with that, Linz, what are some of your thoughts around this topic?
Oh, I was namely just chiming in, and you kind of clarify part of the point of, there are a lot of great methodologies and process tools out there that you can either purchase or adopt or whatever, including OKRs, but that doesn't mean that you'll see them meeting all of your needs. So maybe pivoting and borrowing something else. You don't have to stay committed to OKRs, especially not in one flavor. There are hundreds of flavors. In fact, I don't think I've ever worked with an institution that has used OKRs in the way they were initially invented by the gentleman who invented them. So, much like fashion, you're going to find trends that you like and you don't. You don't be afraid to walk away from it if it's not working for you. But yes, people acknowledging, the organizations, the teams acknowledging that, hey, maybe the company adopted OKRs, but OKRs isn't working for us. I know the group I was in, we were kind of joking amongst ourselves that we were the only ones who really seemed to be at that enterprise level, at that like conglomerate level. And it was nice to hear from the other end of the spectrum, but all the problems are still the same. It's still, how do you make sure that people know? For us in our conversation, part of what came up was like data transparency, information knowledge transparency. No, it doesn't necessarily flow up and down. But yes, when organizations get larger, you find people who are hiding information sometimes, and you've got to find ways of getting around that if you can. And if you can't, just acknowledging it is what it is, and you got to deal with the half bit of content you got. So yes, whether you're adopting one methodology or another methodology, realizing it's not one size fits all, you've got to build it for yourself. But really that data, that insights, how to get into it, how to share it, and how to make sure that that process is something that pulls that in, let alone tries to break down the silos and acknowledging what some of those are. And something like OKRs doesn't always do that, because some companies implement OKRs in a way that actually causes silos, that actually causes infighting. So it gets to that point of not only what's that North Star goal of where do we want the organization to go, but what are we looking for the organization to be? What are we looking like for this entity to land as, not just at? And that's a lot of what can get lost in the conversations, not just from the top down, but from the bottom up.
Great points, Linz. Appreciate that perspective. And for those that are listening, when Linz was referring to her breakout rooms, she was in a large organization, 2,000 plus employees. So that was really insightful to hear from you. Like, hey, yeah, let's get in, let's get our hands dirty. We'll go Claudia, if you have some thoughts on that. And then after that, we'll close with Marge.
Yeah, well, just and Suzanne and I were in the same group, so Suzanne, feel free to chime in. But just to elaborate on what Linz was saying about silos, I think one of the topics that came up in our group that was critical for success of any strategic planning framework is make sure that that has an opportunity to identify key dependencies or blockers among or across different organizations, right? To avoid like each organization working on a silo, but to really truly drive impact at organizational level, we need to work and align our objectives across the entire different groups or organizations and call out those dependencies. That will drive definitely a much more successful process. So that was one of the key conversations we have. The other one is how that ended up cascading down to at role level. So every person in the organization understand how their role for, even if it's tactical, still meaningful and contributes to the broader goals of the organization. So those were two key success stories that we shared, that for any framework, make sure that they include some of those processes.
Wow, great addition on top of what Linz was saying. Love that, Claudia. Thank you for bringing that up. We are up on time. So Marge, if you could finish us up, you are going through this process. So if you could kind of share some anecdotes around your experience and maybe some advice.
So I actually just learned the term Vimosa today. Thank you so much, Chris. I actually kept that link that you shared. But our company's actually been following this framework alongside OKRs. So what we do is annually, we create ourselves a set of goals, 3 to 5 of them. That's our overall company goal for the year that kind of wraps up to our 5-year goal as a group. And then under each one of those goals, we have sub-items that are owned by the different divisions in our company. And then under each one of those sub-items, we have individual goals as directors, and they're cascading, they kind of wrap up. And what we do is on a regular basis, we have our cross-functional team meetings, which happen every other week. That is for each one of these goals. So if I am part of priority 2, I'm part of that cross-functional meeting where I bring back what the status is of that goal, like what the progress has, what does the progress look like the one lady just said, do we have any blockers and stuff like that, and what can we do to help each other so that we can move forward. And then as we go through those cross-functional team meetings, we check them all off, we mark them as complete, and then the company has quarterly all hands meetings where all of us in leadership report to the company on how we are doing with all of those objectives. And each one of those objectives has a timeline. And if they have to be moved, we have flexibility. If they absolutely have to be moved to the next quarter, that's fine. Or if they even have to be moved to the next year, that's fine. And that's working so far for us, and successfully, I might add. And then the other thing that I shared with my group today is that it's very important that you are able to get yourself and your team, especially those who are working on these goals, that you are able to get away from the day-to-day tedious part of your job so that you can block out and protect time for yourself to work on these goals. Otherwise, they will not be successful. So that's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Marge. Wow. What a great, I want to thank Brian for bringing up such a great topic. Of course, we want to thank the creator of the Brain Trust, Alan Rich, founder of Y Meadows. Thank you, Alan, for bringing this group together. If you'd like to close us off today, that would be great.
Thank you, everybody, for participating. Special thanks again to Brian for the extra efforts, and Brian for sharing your slides, which I'll post on our LinkedIn group as well. So if anybody would like to see the details there, they'll be available.